Hello friends, it is time. It is time to revisit the 3-year-old video on PowerToys Awake. I am Dan Delamarski, the engineer behind the utility that I just mentioned, PowerToys Awake, that's part of the PowerToys suite of utilities for Windows. In 3 years, PowerToys has undergone quite a few changes that made it a little easier for you to keep your computer awake, as it stems from the name. And if you don't know what Awake is, it's a utility that is very similar to what you might have used on macOS, a tool called Caffeinate. So if you are ever in the need of keeping your machine awake because you are compiling a movie, or maybe you are waiting for Blender to render a scene, that is a tool for you. And so instead of me talking, I'm gonna demo you how it works, including all the new enhancements that have been launched since the past 3 years. I'm gonna jump to my screen here. You'll notice that I'm running Visual Studio, and don't be too distracted by it. That is mainly because I use this to compile the latest bits. That is the latest version of PowerToys, the latest version of Awake is going to be launched soon, but don't worry, the things that I'm going to be covering today are already available in production builds of PowerToys Awake, so you can download PowerToys, install it in your local Windows computer, have it up and running in just seconds. I'm going to minimize this because I don't really need it, and PowerToys is already running in debug mode along with Awake. I'm going to double click here on the PowerToys settings. To get to Awake, I need to go to System Tools. And here I'm going to go to the Awake tool. Again, very self-explanatory. And if you've used PowerToys before, this should be somewhat familiar. Awake operates in several different modes on your Windows computer, giving you the flexibility that you might want to have if you're operating your computer in a specific wakeness state, depending on what you're doing. One option is to keep using the selected power plan. What this means is that Awake basically does nothing. The way your power plan is set up, that's how your computer will act. Awake will not interfere with it in any capacity. And that's something that you can check if you look inside the power plan. So in the control panel, you can go to the power plan settings, and you can look at, in my case, I'm using balance right now with a custom setting of turning off the display after 2 hours and putting my computer to sleep never, because I almost never want my computers to sleep automatically. So if Awake is operating in what's called passive mode, or keep using the selected power plan, this means that whatever you have set there in the power plan, that's what's going to happen. The next mode of operation here is keep awake indefinitely. What this means is that your Windows computer will stay awake, as it stems from the name, indefinitely, without any stopping until you explicitly turn it off. Now, keep in mind that Awake does not actually interfere with your ability to press, if I go to the start menu and I press the power button and decide to shut down my computer, Awake will not stop it. It can still shut down. If you have keyboard shortcuts or you have a special key on your box that shuts it off or resets, again, Awake does nothing to that. It just keeps your computer awake on its own, as long as you're not forcing the computer to go to sleep, hibernate, or shut it off. Now, the other option here is keep awake for a time interval. This is very helpful, for example, if you start the workday and you only want to make sure that the computer is awake for the next, let's say, 8 hours, right? From the morning until the evening, and then the standard power plan kicks in. That's actually what happens when an interval expires. That is when the 8 hours pass, or in my case, I have 12 hours. Maybe I can set it up for 8, because why keep it for 12? 8 hours is fine. After 8 hours expire, the machine will resume standard power plan operation. So whatever you have set in the control panel for your power settings, that's exactly what it's going to be doing. Awake is just going to step back and let your computer take over using the standard power plan. And by the way, it's worth calling out that this is a misconception that some folks have about Awake. They think that it interferes with the power plan. They think that it actually edits the power plan. It really does not. Windows has built-in capabilities that allow applications to request the system to be in a specific power state. For example, certain apps like, I'd say, DaVinci Resolve, when it's actually compiling a video, like I have many pieces of videos and I'm stitching them together, and now I want to output that MP4, it will actually request the OS to stay awake during that duration. Some apps are not that good about being proactive about requesting those kind of specific system settings. So while the app is running, a specific power state is not requested, and then you leave to get coffee, you come back, and you realize that your computer is off. So in these cases, it's very helpful sometimes to set the interval to say, like, for the next 8 hours, just don't go to sleep. The next and last option for setting up awake modes is keep awake until expiration. That is, if you do not want to set a specific time interval, you can actually specify a date and time when the computer should reset back to normal power settings after being kept awake. So if I set keep awake until expiration, I can set a date like December 25th, or maybe I want to say, you know what? I want to go for January 1st, 2025. Keep it awake until New Year at 6 p.m., of course, because why keep it at midnight? That means that until then, the computer will be awake, but the moment January 1st, 2025 hits and 6 p.m., it will revert back to keeping the selected power plan. Again, very convenient if you want to keep the computer awake just for a few days while something is happening, or maybe you are running a script that aggregates some data. I find it very helpful for those scenarios. The other option that you can also set while you're keeping awake in any of the existing modes is keeping the screen on. And that is something that I've noticed personally is somewhat annoying to me, that the computer might be awake because an app that runs some long running action is keeping the computer awake, but the screen's turned black. And whenever I come back to the office and I go to my computer, I have to press a key on my keyboard until my computer kind of resets the screen. And it might be like 5 to 6 seconds sometimes because I have a bunch of screens. And it's just time wasted. And I like having the option to say, you know what, like, just do not turn them off. And in this case, you can just toggle the switch here, keep screen on, and whatever your setting is here for the mode, regardless of it, the screen will always be kept on. So all of your screens, it will not lock itself. Now, depending on policies, your computer might force lock anyway, but by default, it's very nice to keep my computer in a not locked state and a powered on state. So operating from PowerToys settings is nice. This is very easy to navigate. The UI is somewhat intuitive, but it's not always the most convenient thing, because if I want to change the state of PowerToys Awake, I need to double click on the icon, wait for this to launch, go to the Awake section, change the setting. So instead of doing that, what you can do is go to the system tray. If you've used Awake for some time already, you already know that Awake put an icon there for however long the tool existed, for going on 3 years now. The latest version of Awake, the last few builds, introduced the capability of switching the icons for the current state in the tray. So if I look here, there's Awake, and if I hover over it, notice that it gives me like a tooltip that it says indefinite on. And that means that PowerToys Awake is in the indefinite mode with the screen on. And the icon itself is explanatory because I see this infinity sign. That infinity sign means that it's working in indefinite mode. It's going to run to infinity until the entropy takes your computer away from you. But also, if I right click on this, I can very easily switch the modes of operation, the things that I just showed you. So if I want to turn Awake off and say, you know what, don't keep it awake indefinitely, just turn it off. Let me use the selected power plan. Keep that last option. That's it. And now the icon is grayed out. If you hover over it, it says PowerToys Awake passive. And I know that the tooltip is a little bit cut off by my face, but that's okay. Trust me that it's there. You can see the icon. It's gray. And you intuitively know that PowerToys right now is in passive mode. It doesn't do anything. It's disabled. I can also right-click, keep awake on interval, and I can see some predefined intervals. So if I want to say for 2 hours, I select 2 hours. And now if I pop open the tray, I see this little clock overlay here. And the tooltip also tells me the state of Awake, as well as how many hours or minutes and seconds are left until it will revert back to its original state. So far we've seen the clock, we've seen the infinity sign, we've seen the gray icon. And also, if you're using PowerToys settings and you set the expiration mode, and the reason it's not yet available in the tray is because I need to actually build the interface for how to set the date triggered from the tray, and maybe it's just going to go to PowerToys settings. But notice this little calendar overlay over the cup. This calendar overlay tells you that right now it's working in what's called the expirable mode until a specific time and date. Very easy to parse. Maybe not as easy because it's in a tray and it's a tiny icon, but it's easier than it was before because it was a generic blue icon. And now the tooltip itself is helping you understand what mode of operation it currently is in. So that's how Awake works behind the scenes or through the PowerToys UI. Now we're going to close PowerToys completely, and I'm going to just jump back to Visual Studio here. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we go to the Solution Explorer and open the wherever we built PowerToys, because we want to get to the executable. So I'm going to go here to x64 is the folder because I have a 64-bit built, and I'm going to go to debug, and I'm going to just scroll just a little bit. And I have this PowerToys Awake.exe. That's the executable for PowerToys Awake. So what you should also know is that PowerToys can run from that executable, from the terminal, from any shortcut. You don't actually need PowerToys settings to be able to manage the application. So if I open the tray here, okay, so PowerToys is running, but I'm going to go to Visual Studio here and I'm going to stop the debugging. That should stop PowerToys. It should stop Awake. Notice again in the tray, it's not there anymore. The coffee icon, coffee cup icon is gone. The PowerToys icon is gone. It's not running. We don't need Visual Studio right now. I will open Terminal. So we're going to go to Windows Terminal. Okay. And I have my folder here with PowerToys Awake. And what I can do is I can just copy the path and paste it in Terminal. Just the path of PowerToys. Just run it by default. What this will do is... well, actually, yeah, it's not a string. We actually want to run it. What this will do is this will launch PowerToys Awake in its default mode, which is indefinite. And then you can see that the icon popped up in a tray, right? And if I hover over it, it says indefinite on. It means it's working in the indefinite mode. It's going to keep the computer awake until I actually stop PowerToys Awake with the screen on. If I right click on this icon, I cannot use the tray menu in this mode, because it's just the default mode of operation. It's indefinite. So if you launch PowerToys Awake like this, you, for example, pin it to the tray or in the desktop, keep in mind that you will not be able to switch the modes of operation. This probably is something that I should address in future versions, but right now, the tray-based switching is only available when you're working with PowerToys settings or the PowerToys config that I'll show you in a second. But in the default mode of operation, it does not. So we're going to close this. The second mode of operation from the terminal is something that I actually really like, and this is use pt config. When you're operating on PowerToys Awake from PowerToys settings through the PowerToys suite of tools, that manager UI that I just showed you, behind the scenes, every time you change the time, the expiration date, or the mode of operation, whether you want to keep the screen on or not, it actually changes settings in a JSON file that sits on disk, and it says PowerToys Awake should keep the screen on. PowerToys Awake should work in expirable mode until this date. So if I run it from the tray without the use pt config option here, PowerToys Awake will just run in the default mode of operation that I just showed you. Standalone, on its own, it's going to keep running forever. But if I use pt config, this will launch PowerToys Awake, but also will bind it to the settings file, the JSON file that is printed here. See, reading configuration file from users, mol, app data, local, Microsoft PowerToys Awake settings, JSON. We can actually go here and we're going to go to Windows Explorer and I'm going to paste this. I'm just going to remove the settings.json because we want to look inside the folder. You'll notice that there's logs and settings JSON. So what you can do here is you can open this file. I'm going to put this to the right side of the screen. Let's keep the terminal on my left, and let's make sure that Awake is also visible here. I'm going to just reduce the screen size just a tiny bit. Okay. So it's running bound to the configuration file. What this means is that here in the configuration file, I can make any changes that I want. So right now, if I go to the tray and I hover over it, it's expiring, its screen is on, and it has an end date. But what if I want to switch it to off? I want to make sure that it's passive. Well, for this, I need to change this mode setting. And the easier way to do this is if I'm going to just re-indent the JSON, make sure that it's all readable. There's a couple of properties in this configuration file that you should pay attention to. Keep display on, self-explanatory. It allows you to keep the display on or off. The mode of operation is a numeric representation of the current mode in which PowerToys Awake operates in. The easiest way for you to know those modes is to read the documentation. So if I'm going to open the PowerToys Awake utility docs, and I'm going to close this, and by the way, it's very easy to remember. The links is going to be in the description of the video, but you can go to aka.ms/PowerToys/Awake. Very easy to remember. Click the link in the video description. You'll get there. And here, we're going to close this. I can scroll to the bottom of the page and see the available modes. So 0 is passive, 1 is indefinite, 2 is timed, 3 is expirable. In this case, 3, it's operating in expirable mode right now, right? So I'm going to minimize Firefox here. And I'm going to instead say, you know what? I want 0. I want to disable it. And the moment I change this setting and I save it, pay attention to the console window for Awake. I'm going to save this, and it updated. It instantly reset the mode of operation for PowerToys Awake. And now if I go to the tray, notice that the icon is grayed out. It's in passive mode. So right now, what happened is by me changing this setting in the configuration file, because PowerToys Awake is bound to it, it reloaded the setting and said, hey, I should be passive. Great. Also, I can set it to indefinite. So just as I modified the mode from my expirable 3 to 0, I can modify it to 1, which is indefinite. So I'm going to save this. And again, PowerToys Awake reloaded the settings because it's bound to settings file. And now if I expand the tray, notice the infinity sign. Notice the tooltip that says infinite and on. Even with my face cutting off it, you can see it. It's there. So it's bound to the settings file. And I can modify also if I'm operating in time mode, how many hours and minutes, if I set the expiration date and time. So as an experiment, remember we set for January 1st, 2025. So it's here for 6 p.m. Pacific time. And custom trade times, I'll get to that in a second, I promise. But it allows you to set up custom shortcuts for intervals. So when you go here in the tray and you right click on it, notice because I'm using the PowerToys config, now I get the actual option for using the tray menu. So in this scenario, I can just right click on the icon, and I'm gonna not use my microphone settings. I'm gonna go here. I can see my icon. I can right click on it, and I see custom intervals, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. I can easily switch between this because, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's convenient. It's good to use the tray to quickly swap modes of operation. So these are the default shortcuts in terms of using the interval. So 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. When I set up custom trade times in the settings here, I am able to override those and add custom times. So for example, if I want to use 8 hours, 12 hours, and so on and so forth, I can add them there. But we'll get to that in a second. So let's actually demonstrate how I can set up custom trade times. So I'm gonna go ahead and exit Awake because we don't need it anymore. I'm gonna go to the documentation for PowerToys Awake because I have a very neat example here that shows you what the configuration file structure is. And I'm gonna copy this option for custom trade times. Just copy it and just paste it in the JSON. I have two options, one for 8 hours and one for 12 hours. The first part of this definition is setting up the title for the shortcut. Once the tray menu pops up, this is the text you will see. And then the second part is the number of seconds. So you'll have to convert whatever custom trade times, whether it's 24 hours, 8 hours, 7 hours, compute the second value and put the seconds here. So in this case, we have for 8 hours, 28,800 seconds. For 12 hours, 43,200. So now that I have this, I'm going to save the configuration file and I'm going to launch PowerToys Awake again using the PowerToys configuration file because that's where I define my custom trade times. It's running. And now I'm going to hide my face and we'll open the tray menu here. keep awake on interval. Notice 8 hours, 12 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours. And I can select 12 hours. And then if I hover over the icon, notice the time that it says. It's on interval, screen on, and it's going to last for 12 hours. That's the custom shortcuts. I can define them in the configuration file, and then you can define a few of them, right? Whatever times you want that is convenient for you, and use that as a way to switch times very quickly from the tray. So we're going to exit Awake once more. The other nice capability that is available in Awake when you're running it from the terminal is bind it to a specific process. This is super helpful when you have those applications that I alluded to earlier that they run behind the scenes, they do some long-running action, but they do not take hold of the OS power settings. So your OS will let the computer go to sleep while you were copying a bunch of files in specific applications, or maybe you were running some script. So what you can do instead is bind it to a specific process. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to our good friend, the Task Manager. And inside of Task Manager, I am able to see different processes and their PIDs, the process IDs. If you don't see the PID column, right-click here on the header and select PID. So you see the PID? Check it. Okay, so I want to bind PowerToys Awake to, let's say, Sublime. So if I expand Sublime, I see that the process ID is 15720. So I'm going to do this magic command for PowerToys Awake. That is, the argument is PID, and then I'm going to say 15720, right? It matches our process. So I'm going to click enter. Launch PowerToys is running in the background. It's running indefinitely. And this is an old icon. Don't pay attention to that. Actually, let's see. Let's go here, right? I'm going to also remove my face so you can actually see that what it says. If I click or hover over the icon, it says PowerToys Awake, indefinite, bound to 15720. That is your clue that it's currently bound to a process. And with the screen on, of course, because the square bracket says on, and that's the screen state. Now, PowerToys Awake will run indefinitely up until the point when this process terminates. So let's terminate the process. PowerToys Awake is running. I'm going to go ahead and close Sublime. Let's look in the menu here. The tray. It's gone. PowerToys Awake is gone. The moment the process ended, PowerToys Awake ended as well. And that's exactly the desired behavior. It gets better than that, though. So not only can I bind it to a specific PID, I can also bind it to the parent PID. And in some cases, for example, if you're running, I don't know, a PowerShell script, a batch script, you might want to run PowerToys Awake up until that script completes. However long. It can be an hour, can be 10 hours, can be 3 days. In this case, instead of, and by the way, when you run that script, you don't know what the PID is for that particular process. So instead of you trying to guess it and then run the script, then go ahead and run PowerToys Awake later, you can use another magic argument that is basically use parent PID. What this means is that PowerToys Awake will run up until the point when the process that spawned it will terminate. In this case, I have Windows Terminal, it's Windows PowerShell, and I launch PowerToys Awake with use parent PID, and you can see it running here. Notice that it says indefinite bound to 13968. What is 13968? And for that, we go back to the Task Manager, and we look here, Terminal, right? Ooh, that looks like a glitch. We found a glitch in Task Manager. We'll restart Task Manager. It overlaps the text. That's always fun to find those. I'm going to go to Terminal. So 13968, right? That's what we see in a tool chat. And if I see here, 13968 is the process. Now, if I go ahead and I end this particular task, just Windows PowerShell, boom, PowerToys Awake disappeared as well because it was bound to the process well, and here it's irrelevant because we terminated PowerShell. But it also terminated PowerToys Awake. So you can easily do this for processes that are scripts, and you can just embed the PowerShell command directly into them and then have it run, or PowerToys Awake, have it run, and then once the script terminates, your computer resumes normal operation in its normal power state. So very convenient. This was a request on GitHub, and I think that's super helpful. I love this feature. I've actually used it myself. I have not used it up until I implemented it, thanks to a user of PowerToys Awake that opened an issue, and then I implemented it, and now I use it all the time in all my scripts, especially because some computers don't need to be awake for that long. If you want to know more about the different command line arguments that you can use here, go to the documentation, again, aka.ms/PowerToys/awake. That documentation covers everything you need to know about existing commands, command line arguments, what different icons mean. So for example, we talked about use ptconfig and PID, use parent PID, but also you can set up time limits, expiration times, whether the display should be kept on or off. All of that is possible through the command line. So you don't actually need to run PowerToys settings to be able to run PowerToys Awake. You can run it as a standalone executable. So regardless of whether you downloaded the application from the Microsoft Store or maybe you downloaded it from GitHub releases, you can access the executable directly, run it from the command line from the terminal, and then get this nice view into how to keep awake based on different processes, based on different time limits, or whatever you want to set up. Again, customized to your own scenarios. And then the last thing that I will mention here is that, to me, the most powerful capability of this is really running it on top of the PowerToys configuration settings, the JSON file, because this is how you can, if you want to write a custom UI on top of Awake, for example, to easier manage it for yourself, you want to create different views on it, you want to make sure that changes are reflected instantly depending on certain actions, running it from the bound to the config file and then modifying the config file dynamically allows you to bypass the need to, for example, to terminate the process in a terminal and then run it with different commands. So just bind it to the settings file and then just modify the settings file. And PowerToys Awake will instantly react to those changes because it watches the file changes, and then it will be able to set up the wakeness state depending on whatever you set up here. And if you set up the wrong values, it'll error out and it'll tell you that, and then you'll open a bug in GitHub and we'll go from there. We have a lot of things planned for PowerToys Awake. There's a lot of new features that are coming down the pipe. We're looking at adding scheduled awake. We're looking at adding better management through keyboard shortcuts, improving the tray menu. And that's something that will be possible for you as a customer to see very soon. So make sure to keep your PowerToys Awake updated, or PowerToys Suite updated, and just give us your feedback. Go to GitHub, go to our issues section. So I'm going to actually show you this on my screen. If you want to go to GitHub for PowerToys, so we'll go to awake.den.dev. This is the shortcut that I use for myself for Awake. But this also will link you directly to the repository. So you can go here, you can browse the code, but most importantly, go to issues. Go to issues and see what is there. And if you want to specifically filter by Awake, what you can do is you can select the labels here and select Awake, Product Awake, click on that. And this will automatically pre-filter on things that are assigned to me that are labeled as Awake. There's a bunch of different features. Again, you can triage them by looking at this little label here that GitHub introduced. So it's feature or bug. Give me your feedback. I want to make this tool better. So if there's anything that you feel is missing, anything that you miss from other tools on other platforms that maybe Awake doesn't have, let me know. That's the easiest way to get my attention on Awake. Go to GitHub, open an issue, report a bug, add a feature, and make sure to submit your logs. If it's a bug, you know what's the most helpful is me being able to look at the logs. So just go there. I appreciate you using Awake. I appreciate you watching this video, trying it, providing feedback. Any bit of use, any bit of information that you can provide on how we make this better is extremely valuable. So let us know. let us know how we can help. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see you maybe in the next 3 years when the next Awake is going to have some revolutionary new features. Until then.